Peace Review encouraged the government then to adopt those EU directive things that they didn't in 2003?
Some of them are being opened up as part of Hargreaves.
So they might kind of...
Some are being opened up as part of Hargreaves, and some of them are, I understand, on a European level. The ones that aren't being opened up as part of Hargreaves are possibly going to be opened up subsequently. But what I would also add at this stage is that if anyone has any time, is in a position to do so, what would be really, really, really good would be any supporting letters for the implementation of the exceptions that go to the Minister, Lord Younger, basically in the next couple of weeks. If anyone is able to write on behalf of their university and say, we're so grateful for everything you're doing, the new exceptions, it doesn't really matter if you don't really understand what they mean, but the new exceptions are going to help us so much. And get it signed by someone, a head of department or your vice, someone in a sort of in a higher position. It would be really, really useful if you could do that right now. I'm not in any position to say any more, but if you can understand if you can understand what I'm actually telling you underneath that, okay? So if anyone's interested to do that, just write to Lord Younger and say, this is brilliant what you're doing, we really support you, carry on the way you're going. I understand that would be most gratefully appreciated. Okay?
It's just the main problem that I'm facing is that I have some archival materials and some first editions of music. I'm a musician, which are out of print, and I can find them only in archives. So I need to get permission of inclusion of some images in my thesis. So I need two permissions: one of reproduction of materials in my thesis, and then the second level that I need to take it is the ethos digital open resource, because my university has signed agreeing giving all its theses onto online repository. So I need two different permissions, and I just don't know how to do that.
The way the copyright laws are written right now, the exceptions to copyright, so these greater good things, okay, if you are in the process of writing your dissertations or responding to exam questions and you're using other people's content, if the purpose of your work at that point is to create this dissertation, then you can include third-party content in there without getting permission, okay, for using your dissertation in the print version. The problem is you've identified as soon as that dissertation goes online on your online repository or you publish it, that's when you need to go and get permission. And most of you will automatically be in a position where it will go online anyway.
Exactly.
So that's the problem. That's the problem. So there are a number of help resources that have been created that I can point you to. Many of which I've been involved in. So the ethos, is this ethos? Yeah. There's stuff on ethos. Have you had a look? I think it's on the Cranfield site. There is stuff, I think I might need to send you some web links after this, but there is stuff on ethos that we've done in terms of helping you understand the permissions you need and how to get them. The other project that I would recommend that you have a look at is a project that was funded by JISC in 2009-2010 called Web2Rights. And on the Web2Rights website there are loads of templates for helping you get the permissions you need and flowcharts for understanding what permissions you might need. So there are template emails and letters that you can use for getting permissions. There's a flowchart for helping you understand when you need to get permissions and from whom. So that's a really good start. And then there's another project that was funded, I think we finished the funding last year, which is Web2Rights .com/OER IPR support, which was a project that we were involved in creating help resources for universities who were developing open education resources. but they're more nuanced, the resources that we've created there. So you will find an awful lot of material on there that will help you with your rights clearance. I'd like to take you through a little exercise before we go any further. In fact, I've got two little exercises I'd like you to do. So, I know this isn't a workshop, this is a presentation, but I'm sure you don't mind having a little bit of interactivity. Okay, do you all have some blank paper in front of you? Or a book? Just a piece of paper, whether it's in a book or whether it's on a page. Yeah?
I've got some spare if anyone wants it.
Everyone needs it? Okay, so I don't want you to worry about whether you are good artists or not. Okay? That is not the issue, that is not the purpose of today's exercise. Okay, that's not what's important at all. What I'd like you to do is on your own, sit down, you're sitting down in front of a piece of paper, I'd like you to do a drawing. Okay? Something that springs to mind. As I said, it doesn't matter what it looks like. It really doesn't matter. So if you can sit down and if you can start drawing.
I think you might get 20 obscene drawings of dinosaurs.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Despite criticism, I'm pretty unshockable. Okay, so it's fine, but don't test it. If you do drawing, what I'd like you to do is the instructions are: don't copy anyone else. Yeah? Don't look at anybody else. This is from your own imaginations. Okay? And it doesn't matter how it looks. You spend a couple of minutes just drawing.
Just what? What drawing?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Anything. We don't need to look at them, okay? It's not a competition at all. It's not to make anyone feel uncomfortable. So this is for you, this is your drawing only. It really doesn't matter what it looks like. Okay, it's just another half a minute to finish off, please. It's good to draw a Saturday news, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you shouldn't be finishing off what you're doing. Right, okay, so why did we do that? Well, what I want to sort of demonstrate to you is how easy it is to produce a work that's in copyright, because actually what you've all done is you've created works that are in copyright. It's as simple as that. And this is the challenge that we have, which is copyright arises so easily. So all those drawings have fulfilled the same principles that have meant that they'll be protected by copyright. Does anyone feel comfortable? I've kind of given you kind of clues all the way through to tell me what those might be. Anyone?
Identify the reason.
Okay, it needs to be done by somebody, so it's not sort of, or somebody giving the instructions for it to happen. Yes, I mean, of course, it's not sort of animal art or something that has no relationship to a person, of course. Absolutely, and that person needs to be a resident or a national of one of the countries that have signed the Berne Convention, and most countries have. Therefore, most people in the world will be potential copyright holders. The other thing to say is it's regardless of age. So children and adults can be copyright holders. Daniel's art was a good demonstration of that. We have a question.
So a person who has not like a citizenship, no citizenship, cannot...
Citizenship be fine, yes. Citizenship will be fine. Citizenship, residency, national, yes, absolutely.
So, okay, a person hasn't got a citizenship can be a copyright
Yes,
holder?
they can.
Yeah.
They can. So it depends on where you are based, mainly for where you're doing what you're doing. So if you're an artist, or if you're mainly living in France, but you from time to time go to other places in the world, you'd probably be covered under French law. If you're an artist such as Marc Chagall, who moved from Russia to France, he is now seen as a French artist because he spent most of his life as a practicing artist in France. Okay, citizenship. But again, most countries will. So if you are a citizen here and you've been living here for a few years, but you see that you'll probably be here for a long length of time, most of what you create will probably be covered under what is English and Welsh copyright laws.
Sorry, maybe I'm jumping a bit, but I suppose because you mentioned Marc Chagall, but I was just thinking, like, if you think of somebody like, because I know there's an issue around like Kafka's papers as well, like what happens, because obviously I suppose the copyright shifts after, because there's the 70 years, because there's a lot of issues kind of maybe political but historical about where things belong depending on historical events.
Is that the copyright, or is that the copyright, or is that the actual work itself?
It's works itself, so it's a completely different thing.
Well, what we'll do is I'm going to have you do this. No, don't have to, because it's complicated. This is the issue, and this is one of the issues I want to unpick, which is a different. Well, you've got the issue of citizenship already, where people are located, what they're doing. Most countries, as I said, just to go back on the point you raised, most countries will have signed the Berne Convention, so you'll have key principles. So in fact, the key principles will still be the same in terms of copyright ownership. Going back to your issue, there's a difference between ownership of work and ownership of rights, and that confuses complexity. It creates havoc for organisations like ours, which have archives of stuff, right? So we own the archives of stuff, but we are unlikely to own the rights. Bear with me. Let's finish this little bit, then I'm going to do a drawing myself, and we're going to start mapping, just give you a basic framework. So hold on to that. It's a really crucial point that you've raised. So, what we know is, by somebody, yes, so let's put this on here. Okay, but we've said that it's probably most people in the world. Any other points that occur to you about what you've done and why you're copyright holders?
It's been committed to paper, it's been put down.
Really good, well done, yes, tangible. Okay, it's more than an idea. I asked you to come up with an idea, or just to do it. It needs to be tangible, something you can see or hear or touch. And digital, we could have done this on an iPad. It wouldn't have mattered. Okay, digital is the same as print. Okay, well done, good. Anything else?
Original.
Original, well done, good. It's not a copy of something else, because I said don't look at your neighbours. What else? It's unique. It's copyright's about rewarding something that no one else has done before, basically. What else? Another 2 I'd like. 3 actually.
There's something about the nature of it as well, that it is actually a work of art.
Good, well done, good. So there are 8 categories of works outlined in the legislation that are very similar in most countries in the world. Good. So this is actually something we would class as an artistic work. Not necessarily, it's not a judgment, okay, but it's the nature, it's visual art. It's a drawing or painting or sculpture or map, stamps. Those are all artistic works, but that's one of the 8. The whole category of artistic works. Good, well done. And there's one more. Oh, sorry, there are 2 more.
Anything to do with dates or times of production?
No. No, and it doesn't need to be published either. Again, big problem for you guys working in an archive, because a lot of unpublished works are still in copyright right now. Okay, so I said to you it doesn't matter what it looks like, so it's regardless of artistic merit. There's no one there to say whether it's good or bad. And then finally, but this is in a way preempts the last point I made, there needs to be skill and judgment. Which I think there was. You all spent time on doing what you did. We normally understand that to mean that mere facts are not protected by copyright, or names of people, or titles of books. Okay, but if there's any interpretive element, that has a greater likelihood of being protected by copyright. So those are the key criteria. That's how easy it is to arise. And this is the challenge that we have, which is we're creating stuff ourselves all the time, and we're using other people's stuff. And if we put this into a sort of a little diagrammatic for you, this is all you, okay? Yeah? These are the paintings you've done. Now, I'm going to understand this to be that you've done this in your own time rather than as employees. Okay, if you were employees, it'd be slightly different. Okay? When you created this little picture that you've just done, and all these criteria, we saw that they were all in place. I know they were for all of you. At the point that you created it, in fact, right now, you own the copyright. And it is a copyright. A right that you have, because you created it, you're being rewarded for satisfying all those criteria for you to be able to exclusively copy it. Only you can make copies of it. You are the exclusive copyright holders. It means that only you can distribute copies of the pictures you all made. Only you can put them on the web. Only you can sell copies. Only you can perform those. Only you can adapt or change them. It's very, very restricted. Now, there are the exceptions to copyright, which means, say, I might come along and say to Alice, I love that, and I won't have to ask you, but I could, if I could legally gain access to it, I might decide to take it home and make a print to hang on my wall. I can make a copy for my personal use. Or if I'm studying neo-realism art of 2000 and whatever, I might decide that I might do some research looking at this, and maybe I need a copy in order to carry out my research. So for non-commercial research or private study, that's one of the exceptions that we have right now.
Does that mean if you're like, I mean, my daughter's an art student, for example, and she was learning to paint in the style of X and Y, and she actually copied paintings.
Right.
And I mean, you know, that was part of her art course.
As part of her own personal research, that would have been fine.
Yeah.
If she had then published it, that
Right.
would have been an infringement.
Okay.
But next year, with the new parody exception, fingers crossed that we're going to get, and will mean that she could potentially have then published it, and it could have been seen as a parody.
Okay.
Okay? But this is the problem, is that we are fitting, it's not an
Yeah.
easy fit always.
Yeah.
I mean, we need you to understand the nuts and bolts, and we need you to understand what's high risk and low risk. When you put, so I have the you all have the let's go back a little bit. You all have the exclusive rights to put this on the web. That's the first part of what it means to be a copyright. Copyright, a right to allow copying. See what I mean? It's quite basic when you think about it. What it means subsequently is, if I then come along to Alice and I say, Alice, I want to put that on the internet, right? Which is what you're doing when you're digitising content. For example, if you're creating digitised versions of archival material, you're publishing it. That is not an exception to copyright, okay? And I would need to ask your permission. You have the exclusive rights to say yes or no to me, to somebody else other than yourself, and you have the exclusive rights to charge. It's a reward, it's a way of making money. I've got a question here and then a question here. Was that just a little stretch?
Yeah, well, I want to ask something.
Sure.
What happens when you are using material for another country in Europe, and you eventually, currently it's for my PhD research, but I'm planning to publish that, for example. Then I get the book published, and using, for example, published and unpublished material for another country in Europe.
It would probably follow the same, it would almost invariably follow the same exceptions. If you're publishing it, that is a restricted act. there'll be very few, if any, exceptions that would apply to that, and you would need to get permission from the other country.
I see, but then I'll be following the rules of the other country or the UK?
Well, there's going to be very little difference in the end if you're publishing it. So what you do is you go and get permission, and then they would issue permission in the form of a contract. So it would actually be probably their rules that they would contractually oblige you to follow certain requirements.
Right. So I should like look at their rules.
Well, you need to ask them for permission. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think you can assume that to publish something is unlikely to be covered even if by any exception. That is not normally an exception to copyright that anyone has.
Okay.
Because the exceptions are all about greater good purposes. Things that are seen for the benefits of society, education and culture that seem to be fair to rights holders and do not encumber their ability to make money. And publishing, putting something in a book without their permission would be seen as not being fair, because actually that's an important income generation source for them. So most countries, if any, would not have anything that would allow you to do that. So you have to assume that you would need to ask permission for that, to put it on in a book. That would be distribution to the public. To put it on the internet is the same.
Right. But then if it stops there, if it doesn't get published, it's just a PhD thesis, that's no need for permission.
As long as your PhD thesis isn't put online.
I see.
If it stays print, then that you can incorporate that within your PhD thesis.
But now it's okay. But I'm sure in 2-3 years, like when I will be submitting, I will have to, to submit my thesis online. I will have to. What I will do?
Then you have to go and get permission. But there are, okay, bear with me, okay? I've got some more things to tell you. Don't panic, bear with me, okay? So, I'm very solution driven, okay? I'm not going to leave you to okay, we had a question somewhere around here, and then I'm going to just track this through a little bit more. Was there another question?
I was just started at the comment about the copied work that then would be parody, and what is the definition of parody, or like what is this? Because it's based on something else, but that's kind of the only element of the definition of parody that I can see. So what would that actually entail?
The draft list of text mentions parody, caricature, and pastiche. And it's all going to be down to what the detail of the final legislative instruments, how that is described, and we haven't got that yet. We haven't got that.
Okay, so
as soon as we get that, so LACA, Library and Archive Copyright Alliance, we have been involved. We've been meeting with the Intellectual Property Office to discuss in detail the drafts to make sure that libraries, archives, universities are not encumbered by any of the new legislation, and is within our greatest interests. But as I understand it, we won't see another draft until it's published and presented to the House. So we are waiting for the draft, the final text. And as soon as the final text comes through, we will be finding routes to communicate to the broader community what the new legislation is going to say. Now, LACA, we are on Twitter. If you want to follow us, I think it's UK_LACA. LACA also has a website or web pages, and you need to go to CILIP, the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals, and then follow the route through to LACA. And all our responses to the draft consultations are on our site right now. Mm-hmm. And we're also going to be blogging. Okay, that's our new kind of, I know it sounds old school, but that was one of the sort of promises that I made when I took on the chairmanship, which we'd have a greater social media presence. So we will be blogging, and we're also hopefully going to be setting up Facebook as well, a Facebook page. And through those different devices, we're going to try and communicate the impact of the laws. The other thing is, on the 1st of April of next year, there's a briefing, a copyright briefing, which is organised through CILIP. I'm going to be chairing it, and also bringing in lots of really, really excellent high-profile speakers. So that's the 1st of April, the CILIP e-copyright briefing, And that will be, at that point, I believe, one of the best ways in a seminar space to find out about the changes for libraries, archives and universities with regards to the new legislation. We will cover parody in there as well. Okay, so there's stuff coming.
Can I just, as somebody who grants permission for rights as well, it's worth reiterating that often you'll only get permission for the one time that you're doing that publication. You have to go back if you wanted to reproduce it as well. So we've had instances where postgrads will get it for the ethos publication and then forget them to come back when they find the publication.
That's a really good point. Thank you so much. Absolutely. It's a really, really good point. Thank you. So one time, and if you absolutely for a print run, often you sometimes for a print run. So you absolutely. Thank you. That's great. Good. So just mapping this through. I want to pick up on ownership, and then it's actually picking up on Fiona's point in a little bit more detail about how we can move forward. But if you could imagine that. Alice, yes, I was just thinking, Alice, I really like your picture, okay? I really, really like your picture. I'd like to buy it. Okay, this is the picture, right? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, so this is a transaction. So I now own Alice's picture. Somebody hasn't said anything.
And you own you own that.
I
You
own
don't-
this.
The right.
I own the physical paper version. Okay, so, and you haven't got a name badge, but
Elena.
Alana, right. Alana wants to copy this to go into her PhD that's going to go up on ethos, right? Which is the right procedure.
So I need to ask.
Right. So you need to ask Alice's permission. So this is what.
from me.
So you can get a copy from me. I could supply you with a digital version of this, but to actually reproduce this, you need to go to Alice. Right? So this is how this would map out, and this is one of the general principles that we have, which is,
If I didn't keep any copies of it, would you need to pay the person who bought it
for a copy
to
as well.
have the copy?
Exactly. Which is often a challenge that you're faced with, and often many museums and galleries will assert copyright ownership over the image of the work as well. Okay, so this is the picture. This is the picture, right? Alice's picture that's been given to me. This is Elena here, and Elena wants to reproduce that. Well, the picture belongs to me, but the copyright stays in Alice's other hand. She still retains the copyright. You haven't said anything about the copyright, so you absolutely have to go back to get the permission from Alice. Now, if I were to give this to Barbara, and unless the archives now owns that picture, some archives, when they're acquiring new content, in fact it's very advisable, will ask either for a license or for an assignment of copyright. Your archives may be doing this. If you're dealing with the rights holder, that's brilliant, because you can sort out copyright at the point of acquisition. That's how museums try and deal with copyright. But as is the case here, this is why we also have another problem, is that Barbara Leicester University owns this picture by Alice, but I've given it to you. So I've given you the physical object, which is probably going back to some of the problems with the ownership of items, and there are all sorts of issues in terms of ownership, but the rights still vest with Alice. So as you can see, as objects change hands from one person to another, to another, to another, you're further removed from the person who created the item.
If I died,
If I died, does that mean that you'd have to go to my estate?
Exactly. So what will happen is 70 years after your death, okay, copyright will expire.
And then the museum can do what they want with the image to some extent.
Exactly, but many of them are still licensing out the image of the object. I'll take questions in 1 minute, but I need to make another just point, which is that any of you who have documentary stuff, things like letters, really old letters, yeah, diaries, manuscripts, have a show of hands, any of you dealing with that sort of material. Okay, you have an additional problem because right now, okay, if the author died before 1969 and the work was unpublished before the 1st of August 1989, because that's your unpublished documentary stuff, your letters, your journals, your articles, anything not published. If those criteria are satisfied, copyright lasts until the end of 2039.
Before 1969.
Before 1969, the author died before 1969. I'll take questions in one sec. Unpublished material before the 1st of August 1989. It's unpublished. The end of 2039, which brings in a whole big issues about orphan works, risk management. Now, the law, we're expecting it to change sometime next year. I did ask, and I've been told that nothing's final, but we are expecting 2014, that the current date of 2039 will be harmonised back to 70 years after death. So that's the good news. That's come from the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act 2013 that I mentioned a while back. But it's not now, we haven't seen any draft legislative instruments, nothing.
Why is it stricter if they're dead?
Sorry?
And why is it stricter if they're dead and it's unpublished?
Okay, because copyright used to be in perpetuity for unpublished text-based works because it was felt that the rights holder didn't ever have the chance to benefit from the copyright because the work was never copied. So the 1988 Copyright Designs and Patents Act, implemented on the 1st of August 1989, added an arbitrary 50-year period onto the implementation date. Make it 2039. Okay, that's why. But that's going to be revoked next year. But right now, you need to know that's right now. I have questions here, but I have questions here. So 1, 2, 3.
Can I ask you about her business documents in that scheme? So for instance, I've been going to funeral directors and rummaging through their documents. So what happens in that case?
Okay, when were they written?
From 1870 to 1935.
So they may still be in copyright, probably unpublished. I mean, there is a little requirement that they be made available to the public, so they may still be in copyright. But this is where you need to do a risk assessment, which is going to, you come to the workshop after tea.
No, I'm not.
Okay, so you need to do a risk assessment, because also the chances are you may not know who wrote them. If the funeral directors, did the funeral director, did the company write them?
Yeah, the clerk of the company wrote them.
So it may be less than copyright. So what you could do is you actually may be easier than you think. It might be that you just get permission, a one-off permission from the funeral directors themselves, and just say, I'd like to reproduce these for X, Y, and Z. So it might actually, even if they're in copyright, it might be that they probably will own the copyright if it's an employee. Therefore, you might be able to sort that out quite quickly.
I have a verbal agreement like that, but would it have to be on paper?
Gets into paper because it's going to give you verbal agreements won't stand up because you haven't got any proof.
Okay.
So what I'd suggest is that you go onto the toolkits that we mentioned and have a look for a template that you can download, just get them to sign it, and that will help you enormously. We'll cover again after. I'm going to cover risk management in more detail, and we've got some scenarios after tea break. But also, what we're going to be doing is the digitisation life cycle and copyright clearance. But I will, after break, diagrammatically, so it's really interesting. But I will say to any of you who are not coming after tea break, please remember when you're seeking copyright permissions, the two fundamental things to work out before you get permissions are, apart from whether it's in copyright or not, are number one, who is it that you're making this thing available to in digital form? Who's your audience? And what are you then going to be allowing them to do with it? Because only by establishing those 2 points will you then make sure you get enough permissions from the rights holders. So you need to work, who is it? Who's the audience of whatever you're doing? Under what terms are you going to be allowing them to use it? I've got 2 questions, and then I need to pick up on something about free content. So I think it was a question here and a question here.
I think you answered most of my question, but I could have just double-checked that in the sense. I'm working on letters, so what you just threw there was very relevant. So I have to get the copyright from the author of the letters, and I don't really have to care about the recipient of the letters who then gave it to the archive.
Perfect, exactly. I mean, obviously, you've got issues there in terms of other legal issues that can arise. Always be mindful of that. You know, you've got data protection issues, rights of privacy, libel, obscenity. But web2rights.org.uk is a really good resource for giving you an outline of other issues that might arise. We've done lots of briefing papers on other legal issues. They're still relevant. But yes, absolutely. It's the person who wrote the letter. Because, look, if you're an employee, it's your employer who owns the copyright. Okay, so you need to just bear that in mind. But the issue is that is mainly going to be the person who wrote the letter. One question here, a question there, a question there. Good.
So my question is this: I know who is the person who holds the copyright. My person has died, so it is his family.
Yes.
And the copyright, as I have been told, is the oldest of the family decides.
Right.
Yes, but they have set up a foundation into the composer's memory. So I also have Prokofiev's foundation. I have head of the foundation, who is basically, he has given me permission.
Yes.
But the thing is that the heirs, the family, if the older part of the family dies, then the younger will come, but the foundation will be still there.
Right.
Like,
I think that should be fine. But what I would do is, have you got permission in writing?
Not really well.
Get permission in writing, and if you can, a good word to use is either in your permission, irrevocable. Which means that they can't, irrevocable, which means that it can't be revoked. It can't be changed. If you can pop that in. I would like permission, irrevocable, and an irrevocable license, something like that.
And Victoria, I think you're in Naomi's workshop, aren't you, after break? So
we can make up on that. Okay, that's a good point. We have a question there, and then I'd like to talk about free stuff.
Yeah, just on the letters issue that you mentioned, I'm working on letters also, but what happens when the letters are held by an archive and the author of the letters, they are just ordinary people and you can't find them?
That possibly will be an Orphan Work issue. Are you coming to my workshop after tea break? Okay, you need to think about risk management. You need to carry out basic searches to try and trace rights holders. Okay, and there is a new, we will be talking about this again after tea break, but there is going to be it depends, look, if it's for your dissertation, fine, but if your dissertation is published or put online, then you've got problems, and you need to decide about your approach. You need to carry out sort of specific due diligence trying to trace rights holders. There is going to be an Orphan Works licensing scheme, which is going to be launched by the government next year, 29th of October. There's going to be an exception for copyright for text-based works that you can use in certain circumstances as well. So there are some possible solutions around the corner. So the answer is right now, it's about risk management and due diligence. From end of next year, there are some possible, there's an exception and then there's a licensing scheme. You might fall within scope of that. What? Yeah, okay.
My question is about the 2 hours. Why governments are so reluctant in changing legislation? In other words, who's lobbying and why?
It's a really good question. Who's lobbying why? The rights holders are lobbying because they feel that their business models are being undermined, and in fact they're still lobbying like crazy, even for the new suite of exceptions. Yeah. So they feel that stronger copyright laws promote the creative industries more. And there is a counter-argument, which we have been making, which is actually no, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And if you look at the fair use regime in the States, which is more permissive than our regime, actually the creative industries have done better in the States and in countries which have a more balanced and equal regime than we have right now. But this is a very much a sort of, it's an intransient, fixed perception of, I think, analog, but not understanding that digital actually...
Exactly, but I attended the conference in Amsterdam, and about copyright, about free access to collections, and the CEO of publishing company was invited, And basically he said, well, we are so reluctant in changing because we don't know how to manage the digital production. So if we take decision now, these can somehow, this can put at threat our profits.
Absolutely, and that's exactly it. And so exactly.
So they don't want to change because they don't have a new business model.
Exactly, and I think that the organisations who are doing really well are those who've seen the digital space as being one of actually promoting content, and also there is an intrinsic issue. So I've done a lot of work in the space. I've run a pilot course for JISC on sustained digital resources. We're about to launch that. And done a lot of work on innovation. A lot of work I do with my clients is about their bigger licensing activities, i.e. how free and charged for content can coexist. So a lot of this is about actually where the value is. And in fact, any of you who are, well, the Open University representative here is probably fully aware of the business model where you can make stuff available for free, but that provides marketing for the stuff that's offline that you can charge for. So there's lots and lots of mixed business models and new models being developed where digital can act as very well. But I agree, there's a sort of a narrowness in how that works. But one of the things I wanted just to point you to and talk about free content is the role of Creative Commons in all of this, because I think that Creative Commons is very much a content-driven initiative coming from the States, which was all about trying to create a cultural commons of content, but using licenses, very permissive set of 6 licenses in order to facilitate that. And Creative Commons licenses are now one of the key ways of finding free-to-use content and very much fulfilling open access requirements. And so one of the ways that you can help yourselves, we've spoken about risk management, and we'll talk more about that after break. We've spoken about how you can help yourselves, which is identifying the issues, but also putting time. Copyright does take time, so you need to build that into your projects. We spoke about, in order to move things on, try and keep up to date with what's happening in the legislation. And I've given you some sources and indications of where you can find out more, because they may be able to help you. Another way of dealing with copyright sensibly is trying to get open stuff. Whether it's through an open access repository or it's material that's licensed out under a Creative Commons license, CC. There are some publishers who are making some of their stuff available open access. It won't be all of it. There is, even beyond Creative Commons licensed materials, there is lots of free-to-use stuff. So if you're in anything to do with cultural heritage, really excellent people are the Imperial War Museums, very good clients of mine, but also the National Portrait Gallery. I don't know if you followed the news, but the Rice Museum has also made, the Rice Museum, there's a museum in Sweden, loads of stuff in the public domain. Try and get hold of stuff that's already licensed or available for free. And we mean free to use. There's a very good little tutorial on JISC digital media, which is about finding free to use stuff. Your university might have signed up through JISC collections to gain access to a number of resources that you can use as well, fairly freely. So that's JISC collections licensed stuff. You need to talk to your librarians about that. Okay, so explore the possibilities of using stuff that's already been licensed to be able to be used. And toolkits. Use the toolkits. Okay? The stuff produced by JISC has already been paid for by the funder, and it's free to use for you to adapt and change.
And Naomi, I can get some of these links from you perhaps and put them up on the website.
That would be amazing, thank you.
And again, if people have got questions, I know that you haven't been able to use the website, but hopefully you'll get that sorted out and people can kind of contact you if they're not in your workshop group.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Okay.
So
Yeah.
incredibly helpful.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Does that help you? Yeah. So we haven't covered everything about copyright today by any stretch, but it's hopefully given you enough to get you started. I look forward to seeing all of those who signed up for this next session. Follow the links, and I will be milling around a little bit after lunch as well, or during lunch if you've got other questions you want to ask me.
Thank you so much, Naomi.